What if I told you some spirits never left their graves, and tonight they might be watching you? If you love ghost stories, hit subscribe, tap like, and share this video so we can bring you even more terrifying tales. Subscribe, like, share to keep the ghosts coming.
Story 1. The Stranger on the Appalachian Trail. It was early June, and the forests outside Asheville, North Carolina, were alive with the heavy stillness of summer. My boyfriend, our dog, and I had chosen a spot just a few feet from the Appalachian Trail, with the river curling lazily behind our tent. We'd spent the day kayaking and had returned sunburnt, sore, and short on patience. To unwind, we shared some edibles. Nothing heavy, just enough to take the edge off. My boyfriend was dozing in the hammock strung between two oaks, while I stretched out on a blanket, watching the sky turn amber above the treetops. That was when I saw him. At first glance, he looked like any other thru hiker. Dirty shoes, sweat-stained shirt with an Appalachian Trail logo, backpack that had clearly seen months of use. He came shuffling down the trail, muttering under his breath. I figured he was tired, maybe dehydrated, but then he veered off the path and came directly toward me. "Hey," he said, not meeting my eyes. "You mind hauling out some trash for me? I don't want to carry it anymore." I blinked. It wasn't an unusual request. Hikers sometimes ask, but there was a parking area with trash bins less than 5 minutes away. Why hand his garbage to strangers? Before I could answer, he reached into his bag and pulled out a sizable stash of weed. "I'll make it worth your while," he grinned, holding it out like a prize. I laughed nervously. Sure, I guess." He dropped some buds into my hand, then shoved a tied-up bag of trash into ours. He lingered. That's when I started to notice little things. His eyes never seemed to focus. He scratched at his arms compulsively. He stood too close, swaying slightly even though there was plenty of space around the camp. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, already lowering himself onto a log. My boyfriend stirred in the hammock, lifting his head groggily. The hiker flinched as if startled. That's when it hit me. He hadn't realized I wasn't alone. His whole demeanor shifted, his smile tight and awkward. "Oh, don't worry," he said quickly, chuckling. "I'm not, one of those creepy guys." That sentence alone made every nerve in my body scream. We tried to keep the conversation light, asking him about his hike. He claimed he'd been on the trail for months, traveling from Georgia up toward Maine. But his answers were vague, inconsistent. He drank beer after beer from a dented canteen, smoked cigarette after cigarette, and then, when we offered him a hit from our pipe, mostly out of politeness, things got strange. He inhaled deeply, then started talking in a low, rapid whisper, almost like he was holding a conversation with someone else. At first we thought he was joking, maybe rambling about trail life, but soon he was mumbling incoherent phrases, staring at the river, occasionally laughing at nothing, then turning to us as if we were supposed to understand. And then came the question. "On a scale of 1 to 10, he asked suddenly, his voice clear, his eyes fixed on us. "How much do I look like a serial killer right now?" The silence was deafening. My boyfriend and I locked eyes, trying not to show fear. I forced a laugh. "A 1. Definitely a 1. Not scary at all." He didn't laugh. He just smiled. The air felt thicker, darker. The sun had dropped lower, shadows pooling around the edges of camp. He sat with us for what felt like hours, talking to his phone's voice assistant when we ignored him, cursing violently at Siri for lying. Every moment stretched longer, and I found myself watching his hands, wondering if he had a knife tucked into that filthy backpack. Finally he stood. "I'll smoke one more, then I'll head out," he said. It was the longest cigarette I'd ever seen. He dragged it out, puff after puff, the glowing ember burning down as slow as molasses. My boyfriend and I whispered to each other in the hammock, pretending to be relaxed, but every second my heart hammered harder. At last, he crushed the butt under his boot, adjusted his pack, and muttered, "See you around." He vanished back onto the trail. But that didn't ease the tension. The entire night we couldn't sleep. Every twig snap, every rustle of leaves sent us upright, clutching the dog's collar. We had a plan. If he came back with a weapon, we'd grab the dog, leap into the river, and let the current carry us downstream to the boat launch. But he never returned. To this day, I don't know what his intentions were. Maybe he was just a lonely, socially awkward hiker who'd been alone too long. Maybe the edibles hit him strangely. But I can't forget the way he asked that question. Not joking, not smiling, but testing us, as if he wanted to know whether we saw him for what he really was. Story 2. The creature in the woods. The Appalachian Mountains have always carried an air of mystery. Their age alone demands respect. Stone that stood tall before most life even existed on land. I grew up in western North Carolina, just outside Asheville, where every trail, every hollow, every ridge had its own whispers. My family knew the folklore, from the brown mountain lights to old churches that felt more alive, abandoned than filled with people. But nothing I'd ever heard could have prepared me for the night I saw something that shouldn't exist. It was nearly 10 years ago. I was taking evening classes in automotive repair at AppTech. My routine was always the same. Leave my part-time job, head to class, finish around 10:30 p.m., then drive the familiar stretch of I-40 home. Some nights, if I wanted variety, I'd cut through back roads. But this night I decided to stay on the highway. I was tired, eager for bed, and planning to hike at sunrise. The night was strange from the start. By the time I reached my exit, the atmosphere felt heavier, darker, like something had sucked the air out of the world. Usually the truck stop there blazed with neon, buzzing 24 hours a day. That night it was pitch black, dead. No lights, no sound. I told myself it was just a power outage, but as I pulled onto the ramp, the woods around me seemed too quiet. Appalachia is never truly silent. You always hear insects, owls, coyotes in the distance. That night it was nothing, not even the whisper of crickets. Then I saw it. A massive, sickly-looking dog burst into the road, only 10 feet ahead of my truck. I slammed the brakes. The old Chevy groaned, the bed rattling as tools clanged against the metal. I caught a whiff of something foul, like rotting meat, sharp and unforgettable. I thought maybe I just avoided running over a half-dead stray. But then it stood up. Not on 4 legs, on 2. Under the glow of my taillights I saw the truth. The thing towered above the hood, its shoulders hunched, its skin sagging and gray like stretched leather. One arm hung lower than the other, unnaturally long, dragging slightly as it moved. Its face was wrong, human but melting, as though the features couldn't decide what they wanted to be. Empty sockets stared where eyes should have been. A shredded mouth bristled with too many teeth, jagged and crowded, spilling out in impossible ways. For 5 eternal seconds, it locked onto me. My body went rigid. The stench filled my nose and throat, and I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just looking at me. It was peeling me apart with its gaze, stripping me down to the bone. And then, mercifully, the porch light of a nearby house flicked on. The creature recoiled, then bolted into the trees on 2 legs, faster than anything that size had a right to be. I didn't think. I slammed the truck into gear and tore down the road toward home. When I finally stumbled inside, shaking, my parents were asleep. I loaded every round I owned into a rifle and locked the doors. Hours later, the smell returned, faint at first, then overwhelming. Something scratched at the edges of my senses. I crept to the window, flashlight in hand, and shined it into the tree line. It was there, standing perfectly still at the edge of the forest. Watching me, I killed the light, ran for the porch, and flipped on the floodlights. But it wasn't at the tree line anymore. It was halfway to the house. My blood ran cold. I threw open the door and fired until the magazine was empty. My bullets hit. I know they did, because it shrieked. A piercing, bone-splitting wail that sounded almost human, like a woman screaming in mortal agony. Then it vanished, swallowed by the dark. The woods fell silent again. My dogs howled all night. I didn't sleep. Over the years, I tried convincing myself it had been a hallucination, stress, exhaustion, too much imagination. But that wasn't the end of it. The smell followed me, the sounds, the strange mimicry. Later, when I moved with my wife, we heard it again, imitating our dog's bark perfectly from outside the old kennel on the ridge. I knew it wasn't him. I knew it was it. Even now, far from those mountains, the memory claws at me. The way its face seemed to shift, as though it wasn't one thing but many, always changing, always hungry. The way the woods went silent, as if the earth itself refused to acknowledge its presence. Some people in Appalachia say these mountains hold ancient things, older than humans, older than the trees themselves. Some say they're guardians, others say they're devourers. All I know is that something looked at me that night, and I don't think I was ever meant to see it. Story 3, Grandma's Warnings. The Goatman of Kentucky. When I was 11, my family lived in the foothills of eastern Kentucky, thin roads that crouched between low ridges, yards that melted into brambled woods, and a sky so dark at night the Milky Way looked like a smear of milk across velvet. My grandma was a small woman with a voice that could silence a room. She had rules that sounded old-fashioned then and sacred now. Don't mess with wild animals. Don't go into the woods alone, and strangest of all, if you hear your name in the woods, don't answer. She'd say it like a prayer and lock her jaw when she said the last part, like repeating it kept something at bay. I thought she was just cautious until the night everything changed. It was August, humid and thick with the smell of cut grass and berries. My dad and I had mowed a path through tall summer grass and blackberry brambles, so we could camp near the hollow without walking too far. We liked the spot because Grandma's trailer was close enough that we could head back if anything went wrong. Dad left to check on her and grab more beer. He told me not to mess with the fire. And I sat by the small scrape-around blaze, eating watermelon slices and listening to the ordinary sounds of a summer night. Crickets, a distant frog, the soft rush of the stream, until the noises stopped. It was the kind of silence that presses against your ears. The wind quit, the frog calls cut off, the stream felt like it had been strangled of sound. Then came a metallic chemical tang at the back of my throat, like licking the handle of a battery or inhaling smoke from overheated metal. I tasted it as much as smelled it, a biting copper-bitter taste that made me gag. When my dad returned, he was sudden and sharp. He smelled it too and accused me, angry, half-drunk, of tossing cans into the fire. I told him I hadn't. He said a storm was rolling in and we should pack up, which made no sense because the sky was clear. Still, the air felt wrong, and his face had the hurried edge of a man who didn't want to be there. We left the tent, and as we walked back across the field, lightning flashed so bright it made everything look like midday for a heartbeat. That's when I saw it, not fully, just on the porch of the neighbor's house, a silhouette that didn't belong. The shape moved closer with each strike. On the third flash, it stood beside the very trees we'd left, no more than a few feet away. I froze, my muscles locked. It was standing upright, side by side with the tree line, a hulking wrong thing that filled me with a cold that had nothing to do with the night air. I ran inside and told my grandma I thought I'd seen something. She didn't laugh. She only told my dad to lock the windows and doors. He obeyed in an annoyed, fumbling way, but for the first time I saw the worry in his face. That night I slept in my grandma's bed beside her, and felt the house breathe with the strained silence of people waiting for something not to happen. The next morning the tent was shredded, not torn like an animal clawed through it, but ripped apart and pulled outward as if invisible hands had peeled it back. My uncle's chickens had been killed, heads removed, but there was no blood. For weeks adults walked the kids to the bus stop. Dad was late to work for nearly 3 weeks, and whenever I tried to talk about what I'd seen, conversation slid away from me like water. My relatives suddenly changed the subject. My aunt's jaw would clench whenever I said anything close to the woods. And once, when I mentioned it at a family get-together, she snapped, "Don't say that here. Don't bring that evil out." Years later, when I was older and reading things on the internet, I stumbled on other people's accounts, the same stench, the same shredded tents, the same empty birdless silence. They called it Goatman. The name felt right in a way that made my stomach drop. It wasn't just a local superstition. The stories were threaded through other towns. Different faces, the same pattern. The details differed. Some said goat legs. Some said a hunched back like a wolf. Others talked about a man slipped into an animal skin. But the heart of it was always the same. A presence that mimicked, that lured, that left a taste of metal and fear behind. The most disturbing thing is not always the shape. I can't even describe it fully. How do you explain something that seems to shift every time you look? But I remember sensations as clearly as I remember faces. The metallic taste that filled my mouth. The way all animal sounds held their breath. The way the trees seemed to lean away from it. Like even wood wouldn't host it willingly. And most of all, the way grown adults who loved me changed their tone when I brought it up. Protective, fearful, and finally, secretive. Grandma's rules made sense after that. It wasn't superstition, but a set of small rituals to keep an unseen danger from crossing thresholds. Don't answer the name. Don't follow a familiar face. Never go alone. We never went back to that field after dark. I never again ignored her warnings. Even now, decades later, when I pass a stretch of woods, in a small Appalachian town, and my ear catches that perfect silence, the kind that isn't empty but full of waiting. I remember the copper tang at the back of my throat. If you ever find yourself walking the hollers of Kentucky, please do 2 things. Keep your flashlight close, and if you hear your name called from the trees, do not answer. Story 4. The thing in the Cornfield, Indiana summers are the kind that stretch on forever. Heat shimmering off cracked pavement, cicadas screaming from every tree. I grew up in a town so small you could drive through it in 5 minutes, surrounded on every side by farmland. Cornfields that grew taller than me by July. Stalks that turned the world into green walls. As kids, we treated the fields like labyrinths. We made dares out of running into them at night, racing to see who could last the longest before fear pushed us back out. It was all fun until one August night when we realized those fields weren't empty. I was 16, staying over at my friend Mark's place. His family farmed soybeans and corn, acres upon acres of it. Their land ending where the old county road split into gravel. That night, Mark's parents were gone at a church event, leaving us the house. We were supposed to be responsible, but we ended up doing what teenage boys do. Video games, pizza, scaring each other with ghost stories. By midnight, the heat was unbearable, and the open windows pulled in the heavy smell of corn pollen. Then we heard it, something moving outside. At first it was just rustling. Could have been wind, could have been a raccoon, but there was no breeze, and the sound wasn't random. It was steady, deliberate. A push of stalks, a pause, another push. Getting closer. Mark killed the lights and we pressed against the glass. The moon hung low and pale, just bright enough to paint silver edges on the rows. At the far end of the field, the stalks shifted like something large was forcing its way through. My first thought was a deer, but deer move quickly, nervously. This was slower, heavier, dragging. Then came the smell. Rot, sharp and sour, like wet earth mixed with roadkill. It rolled in through the window and made my stomach twist. Mark gagged. I whispered that we should go outside with flashlights. Stupid bravery born from too many scary movies. Against all better judgment, we did. The night air was thick. Every step into the yard felt like wading into water. We swept the beams of our flashlights over the rows. Nothing, just corn, tall and endless. Then from inside the stalks something answered. It wasn't words. It wasn't an animal sound. It was wrong. A garbled imitation of laughter. Like a recording of a laugh played backward and slowed down. Mark's hand tightened on my arm. The stalks about 20 feet ahead parted. Something stood there half shielded by the corn. At first I thought it was a scarecrow, broad-shouldered, unmoving, but then it stepped forward. Its body was human in shape but stretched thin, skin clinging to bone like paper. Its arms were too long, hanging nearly to its knees. What hair it had was patchy and stringy, hanging over a face that wasn't quite a face. Its features shifted in the flashlight beam, as if it wore several faces at once, flickering between them. The smell poured off it in waves. We froze. It tilted its head like it was studying us. Then it spoke. Not in its own voice. In Mark's mother's voice. "Boys, come inside." The sound was pitch perfect except for the way it dragged, like a cassette tape being chewed up by an old player. That broke us. We bolted. My flashlight clattered to the dirt, useless. We sprinted for the porch, slammed the door and locked it. The house felt like the only island of safety in a sea of corn. But even inside we weren't safe. The thing followed. All night it circled the house. We heard its weight dragging through the stalks, the occasional scrape of fingernails against the siding. Sometimes it knocked. Sometimes it called our names in the voices of our parents, our friends, even each other. Once it whistled the same tune Mark's dad always hummed. We huddled in the living room, clutching kitchen knives and waiting for morning. At dawn, the sound stopped. The cornfield looked ordinary again, rows swaying gently in the breeze. But when we went outside, we found footprints in the dirt, bare, enormous and clawed, around the house, in the driveway, even at the porch steps. Mark never talked about it after that night. His family stayed, but he refused to sleep with the windows open. Even in the dead heat of summer, I stopped going over after dark. And sometimes when I drive past endless walls of corn at night, I roll my windows up tight, because I know what silence means in a field like that. I know the smell of rot, the sound of stolen voices, and I know the cornfields of Indiana are not empty. Story 5. The Disappearing Hitchhiker. West Virginia roads are lonely after midnight. They twist and curl through mountains like veins, hugging cliffs on one side and shadow-drenched hollows on the other. When fog rolls in, it feels like you're driving through a dream where the world has been erased and replaced with only your headlights and the sound of tires on asphalt. That's where my story begins. On Route 60 outside Charleston back in the late 90s, I was driving home from my shift at a diner, exhausted and smelling like grease. The hour was close to 1 in the morning. The 2-lane road stretched ahead of me empty until the fog thickened around a curve. My headlights cut through just enough for me to see a figure standing at the edge of the road. Arm outstretched, thumb pointed up. A hitchhiker. Now, I'd been warned all my life not to pick up strangers, especially at night, but something about her gave me pause. She looked young, maybe my age, 20 or so. She wore a pale dress that seemed too thin for the cool night, and her long dark hair clung to her face in the damp fog. She wasn't carrying a bag, no coat, no shoes that I could see, just standing there barefoot on the wet pavement. I slowed down. I told myself I couldn't just leave her there in the middle of nowhere. When I pulled over, she approached quietly, not smiling, just watching me through the fog. I rolled the window down, asked if she needed a ride. She nodded once without speaking, and slid into the passenger seat. Her skin was cold, not just chilly, cold like riverstone. She folded her hands in her lap and stared straight ahead. I asked where she was headed. She whispered, "Just down the road." So I drove. For a while, the only sound was the hum of the engine. I tried small talk, asked if she lived nearby. No answer. I asked if she had family I could call. Silence. When I glanced at her, her eyes were downcast, fixed on her bare feet. Then she spoke again, so softly I almost didn't hear. "Be careful. He doesn't like the fog." A chill ran down my spine. I asked what she meant, but she didn't answer. She just pressed herself tighter against the seat, as if trying to shrink away from something outside. The fog grew thicker, swallowing the world. My headlights lit nothing but white haze, and I had to crawl at 20 miles an hour just to stay on the road. That's when I noticed the temperature dropping inside the car. My breath fogged the windshield. The girl beside me was shaking now, though she made no sound. Then just ahead, a shape appeared in the fog. At first I thought it was another hitchhiker, but as we drew closer I realized it was something else. Taller than any man, thin to the point of breaking, with limbs too long for its body. It stood in the middle of the road, head bent at an unnatural angle. My stomach lurched and I slammed on the brakes. When I turned to the girl beside me, she was gone. No sound, no door opening, nothing. The seatbelt still buckled, the seat still indented where she had sat, but empty. Heart pounding, I turned back to the road. The figure was gone too. The fog thinned as if it had never been there, revealing nothing but empty asphalt stretching into the dark. I drove home in silence, hands shaking on the wheel. When I reached my driveway, I checked the passenger seat again. The indentation was gone. The cold was gone. The next day, I asked around at the diner if anyone had heard of a hitchhiker on Route 60. One of the older waitresses gave me a long look and finally said, "You picked her up, didn't you?" I asked what she meant. "They say there's a girl who died out there in the 50s. Car crash in the fog. Folks see her sometimes, standing on the roadside asking for a ride, always barefoot, always cold, and she always disappears before you reach the cemetery." I drove out the next evening, retracing my path. Sure enough, just a mile past where I'd picked her up, there was a cemetery tucked against the trees. The same cemetery the waitress had mentioned. I haven't taken Route 60 at night since. And whenever the fog rolls heavy through the mountains, I think of her sitting beside me, silent, shivering, warning me about something out there in the mist. Story 6. The night visitor. In my 20s, I rented a hunting cabin deep in the Allegheny Mountains of Pennsylvania. It wasn't much, just a one-room shack with a wood stove, a cot, and a porch that sagged like a tired old man's back. But it was cheap, and I liked the solitude. The nearest neighbor was a mile of woods away, and the nights were so dark you could see every star spilling across the sky. The first few weeks were peaceful. I read books by lantern light, cooked on the wood stove, and hiked the game trails during the day. But soon, strange things started happening after the sun went down. It began with noises, scratching against the walls, faint at first, like a branch dragged by the wind. But there was no wind. Then tapping on the windows, slow and deliberate. 1, 2, 3. Always 3. The first night it happened, I told myself it was raccoons. The second night, when the taps came from the window above my cot, I wasn't so sure. By the third night, I stopped sleeping. I sat in the dark, shotgun across my lap, watching the window. The scratching circled the cabin, moving from wall to wall as if something was testing the boundaries, searching for a way in. The tapping grew bolder, harder, until the glass rattled in its frame. And all the while, the forest outside was too quiet. No owls, no crickets, not even the sigh of the trees. One night just after midnight, the tapping stopped. Silence pressed against the cabin like a weight. I felt a shift in the air, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Then, slowly, I raised my eyes to the window above the cot. A face stared back, pale, distorted, stretched too wide, as if it had been pressed against the glass from the outside. The eyes were bottomless holes, darker than night, and the mouth was too large, curling upward into a grin that wasn't human. For a heartbeat we just stared at each other, me frozen, it unblinking. Then without a sound, the face melted back into the darkness. I didn't sleep for 2 days. On the 3rd day, exhausted and desperate, I drove into town and told the old man who ran the hardware store what had happened. His weathered face went stiff. He asked which cabin I was renting. When I told him, he shook his head slowly. "You should leave," he said. "That place don't belong to you. It don't belong to anyone anymore." I pressed him for answers, but he wouldn't say more, just rang up my supplies and muttered that some places hold on to things that were never meant to leave. That night, I tried sleeping with every lantern lit. I thought maybe light would keep it away. But around midnight, the lantern flames guttered one by one, snuffed out though no draft stirred. The scratching returned, louder than before, like claws raking the wood. The tapping began again, but this time it came from every window at once, surrounding me in a circle of sound. And then, the voice. It whispered my name, not from outside, but from inside the cabin, soft, dragging like someone speaking through water. I spun, shotgun raised, but the room was empty. The whisper came again, closer, right behind me. I bolted for the door, yanked it open, and ran. I didn't stop to grab anything, didn't look back at the cabin. I just ran through the trees, branches clawing at my arms, until I stumbled onto the gravel road and kept going until headlights appeared in the distance. I never returned. My belongings are still in that cabin, rotting with the walls. Sometimes, though, when I wake in the dead of night, I swear I hear it again. The faint tapping on glass 3 times in a row, and I wonder if when I ran I really left it behind, or if it followed me home.